You here. Thanks very much for coming along to the Royal Irish Academy today and online. I'm assuming everything you can hear us okay there. So my name is Anna Davies. I'm Professor of Geography at Trinity College, Dublin, and a member of the Royal Irish Academy. So thank you for coming along to the launch today of the Climate Justice and the University, Shaping a Hopeful Future for All. I'd also like to thank the Royal Irish Academy for hosting us this evening, and to Maynooth University Social Science Institute for logistical and technical support. I'm delighted to be here just simply to introduce Professor Jennie Stephens, who will present a short synopsis of her book today, and Professor John Barry from Queen's University Belfast, who will respond to that presentation. So Jennie Stephens is a feminist climate justice scholar, activist, and Professor of Climate Justice at Maynooth University's Icarus Climate Research Centre in Ireland. Her research, teaching and community engagement is multifaceted, but centres on integrating transformative perspectives on climate justice into policy and practice. Before joining Maynooth University, Professor Stephens held posts at Northeastern University, the University of Vermont, and Clark University. She did postdoctoral research at Harvard's Kennedy School, following her PhD at the California Institute of Technology in Environmental Science and Engineering. And I think you can see from that just the interdisciplinary nature of Jennie's insight and contribution across many disciplines. Professor John Barry is Professor of Green Political Economy at Queen's University Belfast. He's also the co-chair of Belfast Climate Commission. His research focuses on the politics, policy, and political economy of climate breakdown and climate resilience. And I look forward to hearing your response to Jennie's book, John, and thank you for being here this evening. As someone who's spent more than 2/3 of their life studying or working for universities, exploring environmental governance and sustainability, there are many themes in Jennie's book, Climate Justice in the University, that resonate with me. Like Jennie, I remain hopeful that the universities can play a more powerful role in positively addressing the poly-crisis faced by people and the planet. However, it's also clear that to achieve this requires a deep reconsideration of the purpose of the university in the 21st century for public good and planetary health. For too long, we have assumed that business as usual will suffice. And reading Jennie's book, it's clear that transformative change is required. So drawing on decades of experience across US and Europe, Jennie offers a disruptive vision of how universities can accelerate the shift towards more equitable, healthy, and stable futures for all. Jennie, welcome back to Ireland. It's really great to have your insights and energy back on this island of Ireland with us, and many congratulations on the publication of the book. We're all really looking forward to hearing more about it. So without further ado, I'd like to invite you to give your short synopsis. Thanks, Jennie.
Thank you all for being here, those who are here in person, and we have quite a few joining online as well. This is a hybrid event, so thank you to everyone for being here. I also want to thank Anna and John, who you're also going to hear from tonight. We're going to have a conversation after the discussion, and if it wasn't for Anna, I wouldn't be here, because 2.5-3 years ago, when I was looking at my sabbatical from Northeastern in Boston, I wanted to come back to Dublin, and our mutual friend and colleague Francis Fahy suggested get in touch with Anna, and Anna hosted me at Trinity that year, and it was a great year, and obviously lots of life-changing things happened during that year, and I decided to move back to Ireland. And John has been instrumental in catalyzing so much change and support for all of us who are working on change in the universities. So thank you to John also for being here. I want to start by just saying 3 things about the book, just to preface it. First of all, it's actually quite personal. Every chapter starts with a personal sharing my own experience. So it's not quite a memoir, but it is personal. And those of you who know me will see parts of my life that you may know about in the book. And it's really a synthesis and integration of a lot of different ideas that really developed throughout my career working on climate and energy in universities for the past 30 years. The other thing I want to say is the title says it's about universities, and it is about universities, but I think it's actually bigger than that. It's about climate justice in society. And I think that we often think of higher ed as kind of peripheral, this place where people go and get trained. But I argue in the book that higher education and our universities are more central than we think, and they are core to our society. And what we do and what we don't do in our universities has huge influence on society. And it also reflects what's happening in society. So those of you who are here or who may be joining, who are climate justice advocates or activists who may not be in a university, or those of you who may not work in a university or study in a university right now, this book is also for you, because there's a lot in here that's very relevant outside higher education sector. And a lot of it is about how the higher education sector connects with the rest of society. The other thing I wanted to say is that this is not a how-to guide for universities on what you should or shouldn't do. This is more of an imagination of what if universities were designed to establish, co-create healthier, better futures for everyone. What would we be doing in our universities? And I argue, and I think it's pretty clear to most of us, that that isn't the mission of our universities right now. So it's really stepping outside the box, and it's imagining what could be. And I think that's a really, hopefully, a valuable role to play. So the book starts in August 2005, when I started my first faculty position. I was assistant professor of environmental science and policy at Clark University, which is outside of Boston. And I was in a department called International Development, Community and Environment, very interdisciplinary, very much focused on changing the world and having a positive force against the injustices and vulnerabilities that are in the world. So it was a great place for me to start my career. But during that first week of the first semester of my new job, Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans. And the devastation and the destruction and the death that we all saw around the world broadcast through the media was shocking. And my colleagues and I and my students, we collectively kind of mourned what was happening. We all wanted to get involved in trying to fix things so that this would never happen again. It was so shocking. And we all at that point had hope that this would catalyze systemic structural change. But not only, so this is flooding of some of the neighborhoods. Those are just the roofs of the houses, is all you can see. And thousands and thousands of people were temporarily moved to accommodation in the Superdome. And so many people were displaced and horrific conditions. And what was troubling was not just that this happened, but the response. The response was a militarized response. And as the weeks and months went on, it became clear to everyone that the response helps those who are well off. And all those who are marginalized and already in the lower socioeconomic situation were left out. Many people were forced to leave. They never recovered. There was so much displacement and death and destruction even in the months and the years after. So, but at this time in 2005, I had hope that universities and those of us in universities studying these kinds of issues, aware of climate and climate disruptions getting worse every year, would catalyze change. But here we are, almost 20 years later, and we've become immune almost to these kinds of images and other images, and we're really in a polycrisis. So not only do we have the climate crisis, we have mental health crisis, housing crisis, cost of living crisis, financial crises, debt crises, plastic pollution, biodiversity crisis, militarization and war, and the failure of international law, So we are in this poly-crisis, and our universities, for the most part, are operating as they did 20, 30 years ago. So I encourage us all to really ask, what is the purpose of higher education? And as was just mentioned, I just moved to Maynooth University. I'm thrilled to be back in Ireland. And the mission for Maynooth is to imagine and create better futures for all, which I think is actually a great mission. And one of the reasons that attracted me to join Maynooth. But other universities have different missions. Harvard, where I have spent some time, is to educate the citizens and the citizen leaders of our society. Caltech, where I did my graduate work, the mission is to expand human knowledge and benefit society through research integrated with education. Clark University, where I mentioned where I had my first faculty position, their motto is challenge convention, change our world. University of Vermont, where I spent a few years, their mission is to create, evaluate, share, and apply knowledge and prepare students to be accountable leaders. And Northeastern, where I was most recently in Boston, their mission is to maximize positive impact in the world. And they're really a global research university with an expanding network of campuses powered by experiences, is how they describe themselves. But I also think it's important to look at other places in the world. So if you think about Gaza and the universities in Gaza, all of which have been physically destroyed with Israeli aggression. Gaza University, the mission is to provide the community with distinguished graduates who are able to meet the needs of the community and contribute to the development, prosperity, and welfare of the community. Al-Hazza University, also in Gaza, the mission is to satisfy the needs of the Palestinian community with a qualified personnel in diverse disciplines of knowledge, applied scientific research, and sustainable development. If you look at the Israeli universities, Tel Aviv University, the mission is to promote research and equip tens of thousands of students annually with academic knowledge, critical thinking skills, and to influence society in Israel and globally in spheres, including industry, culture, and education. And the University of Haifa is to improve human well-being and Israeli society. So with these, you see how universities are central and kind of core in the different, and they have different approaches to how they see their role in society in different places. So one of the frameworks in the book is really acknowledging that higher education institutions as knowledge-based institutions are being leveraged to concentrate wealth and power in a lot of cases. And one of the ways I envision an alternative is, what if we were able to leverage and use higher education institutions to distribute wealth and power instead? And that's kind of part of the paradigm shift that I propose, and that I think it is possible to imagine a different way of structuring our higher education systems. So one of the core ideas in the book is climate justice. And I want to just take a minute and explain what climate justice is, and how it's different from mainstream climate action that most of us are familiar with through climate policies that are often, that have begun to take shape. And a lot of mainstream climate policies focus on individual behavior, kind of shaming people, technological change, and they assume that we can make money, or some people can make money off of the change. So they have a wealth accumulation mindset and often linear assumptions, and they actually are contributing to the concentration of wealth and power. Climate justice is something actually quite different. And it's really what I suggest. It's a paradigm shift. It's a transformative lens. And it's acknowledging that we need collective action. We need social change more than technological change. We need well-being priorities, a sufficiency mindset. We need exnovation, which means moving away from the things that we know are harmful. And we need to distribute wealth and power rather than continue to concentrate it. And the book is really a call for collective action. And within higher education, that includes kind of resisting the complacency that has become normalized within our higher education systems, and also resisting academic capture. And that refers to when billionaires or corporate interests invest in our universities to steer the ship in certain directions. And that not only helps them out, make more profit, but it also skews all of us to shift away from the things that we should be or could be focusing on, right, for the public good. So we also need to, I use this resist, reclaim, restructure framework, which I think is really helpful. It's from the energy democracy movement. So there are opportunities to resist what's currently happening. We have opportunities to reclaim the public good mission. And then we have opportunities to restructure the whole system to think about how we can meet the needs of society and communities better. The challenge is that this requires courage to imagine alternatives, because we're all kind of told, like, this is the way it's done. This is what we do here. It also requires being open to disruption. You can't actually get big transformative change unless you disrupt things. And it also requires transparency and holding each other and our institutions accountable for what they say versus what they do. And there's more and more actual literature on universities as prime greenwashing institutions, right? They say we're doing all this great stuff, but actually they're reinforcing the status quo and maybe not doing what they intend to do. So as I mentioned, it really is a call for collective action. And one of the things that has emerged during the process of when I was writing the book and since I finished writing the book is this collective new organization called the Climate Justice Universities Union. And we are open to membership, and it is a collective of people who've come together really seeking to leverage that transformative potential of higher education in new ways and accelerate a just transition and advance climate justice. And I want to do a shout out to a few partners here. The Climate Alarm Clock is a podcast that did an episode about the Climate Justice Universities Union last week. Rundale is a new media platform that is going to be running a story about the Climate Justice Universities Union next week. And the Bohemian Football Club is a football club here in Dublin that has a whole climate justice commitment, and we are looking to partner with them in our work because, as I said, the universities have lots to offer in terms of community engagement and different partnerships. So I also would just say that this book is really a contribution to a new emerging field of critical university studies. There's some excellent books. Towers of Ivory and Steel is about Israeli universities by Maya Wind. In the Shadow of the Ivory Tower, How Universities Are Plundering Our Cities is by Devarian Baldwin. And I want to honor here Johns Hopkins University. And the reason I went with Johns Hopkins University as the publisher for the book is because they have a special series on critical university studies. So I'm contributing to that literature and that space. So I do just want to mention quickly, I'm going to go just explain some of the key highlights of the book, and then we can have a conversation. So I tried in the book to limit the critique to one chapter. So chapter 2 is where I talk about all the injustices of higher education. And I start talking about patriarchy, misogyny, and gender violence. And this actually relates to my own experience. When I was at Harvard, I had to file a sexual harassment claim against a senior Harvard professor. And it's very disruptive and traumatic. And we may think that, like, oh, we've solved that in higher ed, but we haven't. This is very real issues associated with gender violence within higher ed. There's also structural racism in academia. There's this capitalist corporatization and financialization, and what some are referring to as the academic industrial complex. There's climate coloniality in academia with all kinds of power imbalances with those who have power and kind of this extractive mentality. And then there's epistemic injustices in all of our educational systems where some people are left out very explicitly. So that kind of critique really built on my book, my 2020 book, which came out during COVID, which I didn't have a book launch for, so I'm happy to mention it here. But just to mention, I didn't talk about education in diversifying power. So it kind of emerged to focus on higher education in this book. And so the opportunity is really to center justice at the core of everything that we do. And that includes feminist, anti-colonial, and anti-racist perspectives and principles. And the challenge with transformative lens like this is that we can all either be, and our institutions are either, kind of resisting the legacy of all of these oppression, imperialism, coloniality, racism, misogyny, transphobia, or we can be reinforcing it or resisting it. And at different times, like obviously sometimes we have to go along with the systems, but we all also have opportunities to resist as we go. So very quickly, I want to just build on this knowledge, wealth, power framework and just give a few quick highlights about teaching, research, finances, and relationships in the book. So one big concept is about unlearning. And I suggest that we really need to unlearn neoliberal economics, which is the main way that economic theory is taught in our universities. And I quote Michael D. Higgins, the president of Ireland, "Our failure to facilitate a pluralism of approaches in teaching economics is a deprivation of basic students' rights, indeed citizen rights, leading to a narrow, blinkered, and distorted education." So instead of teaching only neoliberal economics, we should and could be also teaching about the solidarity economy, a caring economy, well-being economy, ecological economics, feminist economics, donut economics, where there's a ceiling and a floor for basic economic well-being, and degrowth and beyond growth. So there's so much diversity in how to think about economics, yet most economics departments in our universities focus very narrowly on neoliberal economics. The other thing we need to unlearn is knowledge hierarchies. So our universities have really moved away from and don't teach relational knowledge, which is how we're all connected to each other, how we're connected to the beyond human world. We don't emphasize embodied knowledge, how our bodies tell us what's happening in the world. We don't focus on local knowledge. So there's other ways that our universities and what we learn can be challenged. So in terms of research, reimagining research, some of the big ideas are about co-producing knowledge rather than in an ivory tower, studying things, actually engaging more and connecting with communities. And exnovation, and I'll talk briefly. Co-production is really about, thinking about engaged research and engaged work that it meets the needs of people and communities rather than our own intellectual needs. Exnovation is a concept that I think is really important because we focus so much on innovation all the time, which is new things, new ideas, new technologies, new practices, but we assume that the new will displace the old. But what we're finding is that isn't the case, especially with fossil fuels, for example. We have renewables, but fossil fuel exploration continues to skyrocket, and the fossil fuel companies are making more money than they ever have. So we need research on how to phase out fossil fuels. We need research on how to stop our reliance on plastics and PFAS, forever chemicals, which we all know now are in our bodies, causing us harm, yet we don't have a lot of research on how to stop using them. So another chapter is about finances and financial flows within the university. And there's so much here that I just want to highlight a few things. That what's happened, over the past 20, 30 years is universities have public funding in a lot of places has been reduced, and corporate influence, students more as customers than students, all these pressures for revenue maximization, overworked and overstretched staff, commodification of knowledge, real estate markets, and universities being more engaged than ever before in finance. And that has a toll, and it has a big impact on what we're doing in our universities. And so I reimagine, what would reparative finance for universities look like? What about more public ownership and cooperative models and debt-free access. And one of the things I just looked up this week, the Harvard endowment, for example, is now $53 billion. So the logic that one university can accumulate so much wealth, and that somehow the more wealth they accumulate, the more good they do, just doesn't make sense. So like, why is it that one university has that much money, and how is that helpful for society? So these are some of the ideas that are in that chapter. And the final kind of substance chapter is about reimagining the power relationships and community engagement, and thinking specifically about how we can engage more connected in our communities, local empowerment with global solidarity. And grandmothers, Vandana Shiva has suggested grandmothers' universities, so that local knowledge doesn't disappear. And I want to acknowledge also colleagues with the RISE network, which is a group of scholars and universities that came together to respond to Hurricane Maria and the devastation of the universities in Puerto Rico. And really kind of rethinking how we as academics can support each other. Ecoversities is a global alliance of innovative organizations and initiatives that are really connected with their local communities in really specific and productive ways. And I also just want to mention quickly this idea that what if our universities were distributed geographically more, and that every community had access, kind of like we do with public libraries, to some resources from our universities. I think that is an idea that could be, especially with more climate disruptions and communities needing more resources, it could be a mechanism. Our university could be thought of as critical social infrastructure for change. So those are the main ideas. And I think, as I said at the beginning, the idea is that the knowledge, wealth, and power connections are always going to be there. It's not talking about separating them, but it's just about how can we leverage those to distribute wealth and power, rather than continuing that our universities are contributing to concentrating it. And I just want to acknowledge there's so much work being done in this space, and so many people around the world are involved in different initiatives. Faculty for a Future, Fossil-Free Research, Campus Climate Network, the Scientist Rebellion, Beyond the Academy. But the irony of it all is that these organizations are very small, and they're very hard to find funding, right? So a lot of them, people get burned out, and then it doesn't lead to the bigger transformative change. But I think we're at a time where many of us are really ready for more specific engaged action. So this is really an opportunity to engage and think about more transformative change in our universities. So I will end there. I'll just mention my 2 adult children, Cecilia and Aiden, are back in Boston, and so they're not here, but the book is dedicated to them, and I learn more from them than from anyone else. I want to acknowledge Johns Hopkins University Press for the excellent production of the book and other supports. So many people, particularly those of us, some in the room, Climate Justice Universities Union people, and so many colleagues, including I was at a Radcliffe fellowship last year, and the RISE colleagues, and so many students that I've worked with and inspired me in so many ways. These are just a few recently. And I also want to thank all of you for being here. Thank my family, my parents, and Martin, my partner, all who actually read all 3 of them read versions of my book as I was writing chapters. So thank you to them in particular. So I think that's it. We can stop there. Can we move it back to the first slide is what I was thinking. Okay, I'll let John go.
That was great. Jennie raises so many interesting issues, and looking at all of those organizations that you mentioned, all doing really important work, but I wonder how much we can bring them together. I know we talk about the burnout and so many proliferation of these organizations. Is there a way of bringing all of those together productively to sort of scale up some of those arguments? And John now is going to give a short response to Jennie's presentation. So John, I'm very welcome up for a second, and then we'll have a conversation.
Ihe White Galer, August Gahordas, Jennie and Fáilte Awalia, welcome home. You couldn't have come at a better time. You mentioned the poly crisis, but as a Dubliner, we call it, we're in a jocker. We're in a very, very serious situation. It's worse than people think. And I think Jennie's book is a cri de coeur. It's bearing witness to what's happening in the world, about what we can do within the academy. We're privileged knowledge workers. We have a duty to serve our societies, where we should see ourselves as experts, not just on tap to communities, but actually on top of these issues in terms of how we're going to help people. So I do think this is our Bible to survival. Certainly for those of us within the academy, in terms of how do we create the education and knowledge production for the world we want in the time that we have, in a way in which, if you read the book, I mean, it's definitely influenced by a feminist care perspective, and the importance of saying that we should be talking more about the emotional impact of what we're going through, both as those experiencing the climate catastrophe, but those of us researching it and our students, to which we owe a duty of care in terms of acknowledging. I'm a father of two, and I'm shit scared about my kids' future. So on behalf of my children, Jennie, I'd like to thank you that at least you're trying to right-size the university at this time. And Jennie offers a very feminist and very personal book, which I really acknowledge your courage for doing that. And it's time for plain speaking at this time, in terms of the university as it's currently configured is part of the problem. We have to acknowledge that. You know, a word that Jennie uses often is leverage. And actually it's a very good word. And what she does in this book is leverage our institution that many of us here probably have been through or in or work in, the academy. It's an extremely privileged position to be in. It's not as fancy as people think. We don't sit around for 4 months of the year doing nothing, or have high table every evening where we're served with tea and biscuits and barrels of beer, like we're some sort of Oxbridge arrangement. It is work. We are a workplace. We are workers, although many of us don't see ourselves as workers. And Jennie's book, I view and I really acknowledge by popping the lid on our workplace and what's going on here. Why is funding going in this direction towards lots of technological innovation, bullshit strategies of carbon capture and sequestration, geoengineering, shiny things that are going to create an easy way of solving this problem? That's the reason why I acknowledge Jennie's book talks about hope, not optimism. Hope requires agency to do something, but also hope has a shadow side. If it's to be truly hopeful, we may fail. We have far too much optimism in the policy world, in academia, and indeed in the media coverage of the climate crisis. Is what we say in Ireland, it'll be grand. It won't be grand. We cannot outsource a sustainable future for us and our kids to technology, or God forbid, the government or businesses. While we need all of those, we've never faced such a crisis and opportunity that we're now facing. And that's why I really admire Jennie's book. She avoided what I usually do, which is wallow in the criticism. We love the criticism. Our training as academics is to say, well, I agree with you 99%, but my whole book is going to be at the 1% I disagree with. And so Jennie actually flips that and provides a hopeful, optimistic vision of the future and tethers it in stories, in the importance of a narrative that connects the head, the hand, and the heart. You know, Jennie's book I see as a revolutionary document. It's one of the few books I've read that's actually started a movement, the Climate Justice Universities Union. Those of us who give a shit. We are a minority within the academy, But I can only see a helpful future, a hopeful future for the academy if we grow and influence in as respectful a way as we can in terms of how our universities at the moment, how they're funded. I mean, Mother of God, how can we be in universities that are paying the wages of Anna, Jennie, and myself, who work on climate justice and decarbonisation, and yet they're invested in fossil fuels? If it's wrong to wreck the planet, surely it's wrong to profit from wrecking the planet. And a lot of Jennie's work, and I know Martin, her partner as well, is looking at the flows of not just fossil fuel money, but big beef and dairy that's slushing through our universities across this island. So it's an honest appraisal of where we're at in terms of, at the moment, the university system is not shaping up to provide the knowledge we need for the world we want. And yet it has enormous promise and potential. We are mostly publicly funded universities. We have a public mission to serve the public good at this time of crisis and opportunity. Too often, the green climate transition is viewed in a negative way. It's often very scientific, technocratic, top-down, and it's what we're losing. You can't eat red meat. You can't be flying to New York for a stag weekend. And it's often very negatively. It's not about that. What are we losing now? We are more wealthy than we ever were as a society, yet we're more divided. We have people suffering serious mental health problems. So while the economy is up, society is down. Yet where do we discuss this? In terms of this disjuncture, this decoupling of ever-increasing GDP economic growth and the fact that our societies are ill at ease with themselves. Never mind then the climate-related impact of refugee flows. We are going to see more and more people who literally cannot live where they are. And that's why Jennie's book, quite rightly, has as in her acknowledgement in a memoriam section, which gives you a flavour of the book, the two people who've sadly passed, which she recognises in the book, are Sinead O'Connor, rest in peace, and rest in power, I should say, really, in terms of that feminist perspective on what we need to do. The other person Jennie recognises, a very famous professor, Professor Sulmanid ul Huq from Bangladesh, who looked at climate justice and development and so on. And to see that, particularly, the book will land very well in Ireland because it's a complicated story. I don't want to make it too simple. We have experienced colonization. The fact that I'm speaking to you, Os Berla, name-checking Michael Cronin here, is evidence of that. There's something about the decolonization in Jennie's book that we need to attend, and not just epistemic, but actually an act of climate justice is to start looking in terms of how do we integrate, in case most of you don't know, there is no international legal recognition of a climate refugee. You cannot rock up to Dublin airport and say, hi, I'm from India, I can no longer live where I am because I'm a climate refugee. We don't have any international recognition, and that's part of the issue we need to attend to. But I want to end by just saying how my summary of Jennie's book revolves around 4 Ds. One is democratization. The second one is decarbonisation. The third one is decommodification and decolonization. I've already mentioned the last one, so I won't spend more time. And so the questions I want to ask Jennie, or invite her to reflect upon, how do we democratize our universities? What does that look like when we start really saying, well, why should democracy end at the lecture room door? Or what is the public purpose of universities at this time of crisis and opportunity? In terms of decommodification, we have to recognize, as many of you sadly who are students maybe know, you're paying for an education. Why is your ability to pay and not your academic ability to determine whether or not you go on to university? How many solutions have we lost by commodifying universities? What disfiguring disruption has been visited upon universities by them being run as businesses? In the same way that art exists for the good of society, the public purpose of education is to comfort the disturbed and disturb the comfortable, which is what Jennie's book actually does. But then on the issue of how do we actually begin to move in that direction, I'm going to end by saying that for me, Jennie, I was channeling James Connolly as I was reading your book, because I think it's a revolutionary call to action, that we simply cannot green business as usual in society and the economy. There is no capitalist, carbon-based way out of this crisis. And we are looking at the end of the world as we know it. That's okay. It's only the end of the world as we know it, not the end of the world. And the same way with the university. It has served us well, but much more like carbon and capitalism and the current configuration of the university, we should give it a good Irish wake. Thank it for its services and move on as quickly and as elegantly as possible. Because to me, what Jennie is calling for in, as I said, the Bible to survival, is the words of James Connolly that many of you would know. Our demands most modest are, we only want the earth. Cohortus again, and Falcha Walia.
Thanks so much, John. Really, really lovely synopsis of some of those very key ideas now. So we have about 10, 15 minutes before we let you loose on the wine and the snacks next door. And we'll just take a few minutes to have a conversation here, and any questions that you have or any conversations you want to continue with either John or Jennie, we'll take those in the other room over a drink. That'll be much more relaxing. So Jennie, John posed quite a big question to you then at the end. If you had any thoughts around the 4Ds and how we transition towards something more appropriate.
Yeah, so thank you, John. And it's, I'm very appreciative and inspired to know that, you know, that the book has resonated. You're one of the first people to read it. And I think one of the things that I think, just echoing what you have said, and this is what I heard Amitav Ghosh speak 2 weeks ago when he was visiting here in Ireland, and he said people are just tired of being lied to. And I feel like that's what you know, that you also suggested, but like we have to be genuine and honest about where we are, and it's hard. But I think we really owe it to ourselves. And I guess the other thing that I wanted to emphasize is that this vision of a better future is not a sacrifice. It's the opposite. And that I think you also were trying to explain that it's not about, oh, we won't be able to do this or we won't be able to do that. It's actually like we are actually suffering now, even if we have our material needs met, or some of us do. But it's actually about moving beyond that and thinking about our connection with each other, connection with the earth and the planetary boundaries and that we need, right? And that we've become so disconnected. And I think that is one of the key kind of approach lens things that we can all kind of connect with. Yeah,
I think that Kate Soper had a wonderful work called Alternative Hedonism, to look at sustainable consumption practices and sort of reclaim whether it's slow food or slow science in the context of a university, that we might sort of flip that argument that it's all about the sacrifices, that we won't be able to have 20 million choices of cereal in the supermarket or something in the future, that maybe we will have something healthy and nutritious for all that's available. So just following on from that, I mean, I think one of the key aspects, and it's certainly close to home for us, is in relation to your concept of kind of rebalancing. You talked about reparations, but resisting the capture of higher education by powerful elites and corporate interests. I just wondered whether there was any way to kind of square that circle between those organizations that are small and under-resourced and then the powerful organizations that have generated that power and influence through the exploitation often of people and the planet.
Yeah, so I think one of the things, moving back to Ireland and also seeing how the Irish system works and comparing it with the US system, I think in Ireland, there's quite a lot of built-in kind of private sector interests in the universities, and to offset, as you said, like public funding declines or additional needs that aren't being met. But the challenge with that is, and I've done quite a bit of research on this, is that the private sector interests are actually getting a subsidy from the public money by partnering with universities that are publicly funded. So that's what this idea of capture comes in, because we know that private sector organizations don't contribute money unless they see a profit-seeking benefit for them to do it. There's no other reason that they would. So, and the challenge then is that the priorities of universities get aligned more with the private sector than the public good. So that is a challenge, obviously, and it can't be changed overnight because there's so many systems and structures that assume that. So in my own work, what I've decided to do is actually try not to partner with organizations or projects even that are accepting private sector funding. I actually recently resigned from, or withdrew from 2 proposals that I found out had partnerships with fossil fuel or companies in them. So and again, that's not to say everyone needs to do that, but I'm in a position where I can do that. And obviously, as I said, the systems are set up so that people are incentivized to partner. And so I think that's where there are opportunities for change, and we all have sit in different positions where we can take a stance and try to, as you said, leverage our positionality for change. And there are different opportunities for different people and different organizations as well.
John, maybe you could say a few words about how you respond to that kind of critical issue, particularly around receiving research funding and the source of the research funding.
I mean, for those of us in academia who have non-precarious jobs, again, just to prick the bubble, for many of you think that academia is this hollow place of privilege. It isn't. It may have been at one point. Lots of my colleagues, and many in the room here probably know this, who work in academia are in precarious contracts, fixed-term contracts, which is not sustainable just on a human level. But there is something around acknowledging, for those of us in permanent positions, we are very privileged, as well as in a way as knowledge workers, and we certainly have a public duty to tell the truth. And as the good book says, the truth may set you free, the point Jennie was making. But as Gloria Steinem, the great American feminist, said, it may set you free, but not before it pisses you off first. And this is part of the courage that's needed, to be like the child that says the emperor has no clothes. And I have to be frank with you, colleagues, I am disappointed with that. Not more of our colleagues are calling out how bad our situation is, that we don't need any new technology. We certainly don't need any new data centers, that's for sure. Actually, what we need is social innovation. We need structural changes in our economies and so on. And we need to acknowledge that as capitalism as well as carbon, that's the issue. And that too many of our academic colleagues, whether it's for courage or laziness or habit, I'm not quite sure, need to be encouraged to use their privilege in this way. We are here to be of service to our community. And least anyone is laboring on the misapprehension of what Jennie and I and perhaps Anna are promoting here, some sort of ideological indoctrination. It's that element of that line that Jennie put up about Michael D. Higgins. We're asking for pluralism. You know, many of the problems in our society in terms of education is that people are getting one version of particularly economics. If there was one thing I could change in the academy, is to dethrone neoclassical neoliberal economics and allow students the full pluralism of different ways of reconfiguring the economy. You know, why is it that we have a male stream economic thinking which essentially means that whenever a female cleaner marries their male employer, GDP goes down. Think about that. A female cleaner that marries the person that employed her was maybe a man, GDP goes down. The same work has been done, but it doesn't get included in GDP. It just, in a way, indicates the irrationality, the social irrationality, never mind the fact that our current economic way of thinking is ecologically ignorant. So it's a tough one. And, you know, Jennie and I have had discussions about this. Where you're a professor and you're fully tenured with security, we should be stepping up and stepping out in challenging our management or getting involved in academic activism. This is not something that every academic within the university system can do, but there's something around using that privilege, again, to use that word from Jennie, to leverage our impact. I think we're more powerful than perhaps we allow ourselves to think we are. And the last thing I'd say is, let's all get woke. We need to be more woke. Isn't it amazing how woke is now a term of abuse? Would you rather be awake or asleep?
Thanks, John. It's interesting, both of you have mentioned the kind of plurality of values, different knowledge systems, and within the university, of course, there are many different disciplines. And Jennie, yourself, you know, you've spanned policy, engineering, environmental science, geography. So is there something about a university in that plural, interdisciplinary space that needs to be done differently as well? Like, what's your thoughts on the interdisciplinary role for a just climate university?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the silos within which our coursework, our programs continue to be maintained are really limiting, right, for our imaginations and what's possible. And I have a story of a student of mine who was an engineering student who took my class. He was taking energy engineering course, and he hadn't taken any social science or any policy related courses. And he took my class, and then he came and spoke to me at the end of the semester, and it was one of the best kind of impactful compliments I got from a student. He said, "Before I took your class, I was a fish swimming in a fishbowl, but after taking your class, now I'm swimming in the ocean, you know, and there's no going back once you're in the ocean." And so I think that speaks to, I mean, students feel the constraints, right? They are asking for and want more choice and interdisciplinarity, but sometimes they don't know what's out there. And I think so the structures of our higher education institutions continue to perpetuate disciplines and departmental structures that are limiting. Yeah.
It's the only form of promiscuity I condone. Intellectual promiscuity, otherwise known as interdisciplinarity. We need problem-based teaching and learning. We need the philosopher to sit with the physicist about, here's a major problem in society. How are we going to solve this? And don't get me wrong, you know, you shouldn't leave tonight thinking that the university is not doing this. Jennie's book is very clear. We are seeing pockets of pioneering research in this area. We just need to amplify it because the crisis is deepening. So we do need more interdisciplinary engagements, and that would involve, in the kind of coloniality context, of reconnecting with this land to our language as well. That is not, you know, a nice affectation on top of this. It is part and parcel of becoming dwellers in the land. I mean, reading Jennie's book, although it's not explicit there, but between the lines, we are talking about the rights of nature. I mean, as well as James Connolly, I was also thinking of the Lorax in reading Jennie's book. Not two people you usually put together. Who speaks for the trees? You know, we need to start recognizing the agency and value and ethical standing of the more than human world. And I know that's very strange for many people in the audience because we've been thoroughly reared in a very anthropocentric, human-centered way of thinking. We need to start letting go. I mean, to me, this is part of the invitation that Jennie has in terms of unlearning and exnovation. We have so many bad habits of thinking, of acting, one of which is this arrogant kind of human-centeredness. I mean, if you read Jennie's book, you come away with a sense that we in the academy have gone too far down the road of presenting the planetary crisis, as a crisis, and therefore there's no sense of, redemption from it except through technology. We've also, not really fully embraced the importance of seeing that actually it's not just a crisis of means, resources, the ability of the atmosphere to absorb carbon. That's that kind of very technocratic scientific view that the environmental and ecological crisis is a crisis of means. It ultimately is a crisis of meaning. It has to do with our fundamental values. What is a good life to live in our turbulent world ahead? And it is ultimately, that's where the hope in Jennie's book comes from. It's about fully recognizing how bad the situation is. And in a way to, quote James Baldwin, that some of you may know, the great American author and activist, Jennie's book is a clear-eyed recognition of how bad the situation is. And as James Baldwin says, not everything that is faced can be overcome, but nothing can be overcome until it's faced. So in a way, Jennie's book is holding a mirror up to us in the academy that are working in there, or our students, about saying, listen, it's bad, it's probably worse than you think, but do not be hopeless. Because ultimately, as Jennie's book points out, hope comes through agency. Giving a shit is a good start. Having a bit of knowledge about the causes is also a good start, but we've got to roll up our sleeves as well. So Jennie's book is not just this cognitive, intellectual engagement, although it is. It's extremely scholarly and very, as I said, courageously personal in a way I've not really seen many academic books being. But it's also about the heart, how we connect with these values, these ethical dimensions, and ultimately about the hand. What's the point in having knowledge unless you act on it? And in a way, that's why Jennie's book is a gift. And it's the way in which, actually, for those of you studying perhaps methodologies and how knowledge changes, this is how paradigm shifts happen. It happens when people are called at a certain moment to rise up to the plate to suggest something new, which may initially seem a bit unpalatable, a bit weird and so on. But that's the paradigm shift that Jennie is indicating. We need to move beyond the medieval organization of knowledge that effectively the university has been in for centuries, and it served as well. Now is the time to move on to something better. As I say, Jennie is the chief presider over the Irish wake of the university as it currently is constructed.
Thanks, John. Listen,
No pressure.
I just want to give the floor to Jennie for the last minute and before we leave to refreshments. I think, John, that was a perfect synopsis of the main driver behind the book. But Jennie, the last word goes to you.
Well, thank you all. And thank you, John and Anna, for having this discussion. And I think one of the things, when people talk about climate anxiety, one of the things that I think I'm hopeful that we can acknowledge is that some of that is from a cognitive dissonance, right? Like learning what's happening, but then seeing that nothing really is changing. So I think, I hope that this kind of contributes to, new conversations. And the real goal of this book is to catalyze new ways of thinking about the role of higher ed. So obviously it's different in every place. It's different in every university, every context, every community. So as I said, it's not how to, but it hopefully will get people thinking in new and different ways. So thank you. Thank you all for being here. And we
Thank you.